Good afternoon. Greetings, friends and comrades. Daniel Tut here with Emancipations for a live stream on the war in Iran and the continual belligerent imperialist activity that we've been witnessing over the past, 6 months or more, maybe longer. Welcome to friends and comrades joining the stream. And welcome back to Sudip Bhattacharya, whose birthday is today.
Oh, yeah. Thanks.
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
And for first-time guest, Tony Ballas, who's with us at Duke University, coming at us from Duke University, where he's PhD student in English literature. And welcome, Tony.
Thank you, Daniel.
So you guys recently wrote a piece that struck my attention for Counterpunch on why Maduro must be released. And, it struck me that it's very odd that we have managed to somehow forget about this insane, almost like WWF style action, where it's like we actually flew in sort of paramilitary operation overnight, stole the president of Venezuela and his wife, flew them to New York City, where they still remain locked up. So this is something that we have forgotten about in the discourse. It shocked many of us that something like this could even happen, and that Venezuela seemed to recoil or rebound from that with a fair degree of stability. We then had in the news the release of the Epstein files for several weeks, and leading up to, the February 28th assassination and bombing of Iran by Israel and the United States, which took out Khamenei, the supreme leader. And incidentally, I don't know if you guys saw this, but about 50% of Americans believe that, in fact, the Epstein scandal has something to do with the military action against Iran by Israel and the United States, right? We have the idea by Ro Kahana of what's called the Epstein class. It's being talked about quite a lot on the anti-imperialist Marxist left. I don't think we should necessarily shy away from using that language myself. I think there's a lot of validity to that language, even though I have been very critical of so-called conspiratorial ways of thinking about imperialism and geopolitics and American empire. Those are some questions and debates I want to have with you guys today. I think the other big question that we want to broach today is the question about how to understand Trumpism as a resurgent fascism. For many years, we on the left were debating whether Trumpism is fascist, whether it represents a kind of standard bourgeois form of politics or even mainstream Republican politics. But clearly, after what we saw in Minnesota with ICE, what we've seen in Venezuela, what we've seen in Iran, what we may see in Cuba, these dynamics are changing our conception of what actually, in fact, is going on here. One of the other important points here, of course, as it pertains to Venezuela, is the question of the so-called Monroe Doctrine that I want to raise with you, which is sort of Trump's resurrection and affirmation of the Monroe Doctrine, which is this sort of hegemonic regional supremacist doctrine of the United States, apropos Latin America, that's been brought out once again. And of course, all of this is coming from a president who ran as a sort of so-called horse whisperer of the working class, promising an end to, all of these imperialist wars. And I even heard many socialists say, well, at least that's the one redeeming thing about Trump, is that his base is traumatized from having to go to Iraq. And so at least he's, against war. At least he has that, right? And it's just like, Okay. Oh boy. Here we go. So anyways, welcome friends and comrades. Welcome to the stream. Let's start perhaps if we could with Tony. And I want to ask you first and foremost, what happened with Maduro? What's your reading of why Trump, I guess in a way, initiated this new aggressive overreach with the Maduro action in a certain way? How does it relate to domestic fascistic impulses such as ICE? Do you see an interrelation there? And and also, what inspired you guys to write this piece on the Venezuela action?
Sure, yeah. Well, it seems to me, as you already mentioned, Daniel, that what the Trump regime has done in recent weeks is a sort of continuation of the Monroe Doctrine vis-a-vis this newly minted term, the Monroe Doctrine. And it is therefore a sort of attempt to try to maintain U.S. hegemony in the Western Hemisphere. That's why you see this incursion into, you saw this incursion rather into Venezuela. It's why you see these sanctions and the ramping up of this blockade in Cuba. And it's why you saw, quote unquote, narco Rubio give this speech at the Munich Security Conference, where he talked about Europe and America's shared religious, spiritual, and even made allusions to ethnic ancestral lineage between the Americas and Europe. And you saw him frame this in terms of a way to resist the anti-colonial movement, a way to resist the anti-colonial movement and the communist movement from the 20th century. And so you see this revamping of this project for these interests of maintaining hegemony, essentially. That's the way I'm reading it, and I think that's sort of what spurred this impetus for Sudip and I to write it.
Sudip, let's kick it to you. Again, happy birthday, comrade. Welcome to welcome back to Emancipations. Why have we forgotten about the Maduro kidnapping already? And why does it matter that some justice be served, in fact, in regards to the Maduro issue and kidnapping?
Sorry, I'm just writing your questions. It helps me that way so I don't go all over the place. But yeah, first of all, thank you so much for saying that. It is my birthday. It is snowing here on the East Coast, so I guess I did that. Let's see. Why have we forgotten? So actually, that goes into why we also wrote this piece, because we do feel like, although it's not fair to say all the left forgot, I don't think anyone's really technically on our side forgotten this, but certainly have maybe deprioritized it a bit, and maybe have not done all the linking that needs to be done that we hope we did in this piece, explaining strategically why this is important. Because obviously morally, this is just crazy. This is just insane. Like you said, this is WWE, WWF, all of it combined. This is like Hulk Hogan coming back to life. Like, this is just all of it. That's terrible. It is, I mean, frankly, the Monroe Doctrine, I think, was first conceived by the New York Post, that great bastion of thought. And Trump, I think, in a press conference following the kidnapping, not the capture, the kidnapping of Maduro and Flores, who herself is also an elected leader. Thanks. That's when he also again repeated the Monroe Doctrine. So again, these are very linked. The Venezuela thing was their coming out party to say this is the Monroe Doctrine that's been kind of percolating on the right-wing interwebs. So what inspired us is that part too, is just like saying there's a moral reason, but there's strategic reasons, which we'll get into in your second question. Why should it matter? Well, the forces that support Trump are the same forces that will go get even more strengthened if Venezuela is turned into more of a neo-colony. That's the very simple one-line reasoning, right? This isn't just, again, us saying the bad guys are winning. It's distinct segments of the bad guys, and to your point, the Epstein class, that are simply going to get richer, perhaps create more allies in Venezuela, that will just furthermore dovetail back to us, which speaks to the ICE question, right? These things are connected that way. I mean, this, for instance, if Venezuela becomes a neo-colony completely, chances are it becomes that way because we've managed to create, this stupid government manages to create right-wing alliances and fascists on the ground who then take over, and who certainly will help the fascists here if we want to take over here. Does that make sense? Like, this is the whole game. The game is never domestic. It's a chessboard that expands beyond borders.
I have a feeling that part of it is tied into a media spectacle. So to the extent that we invoke this idea of kind of a distractive imperialist venture, which, I mean, if you think about it, it's not exactly a regime change in Venezuela, Cuba, or Iran. It's a very ambiguous, is it policy change, right? Like, I mean, in a simple sense, USAID, soft power, cultural power, typically, which was of course removed under Doge, as far as we know, or structured and integrated into state. As far as I can tell, with that kind of more liberal version of sort of cultural imperialism, without building up a kind of pro-American element within the civil society of these nation states, I don't see how this so-called Monroe belligerent imperialism, I don't see its capacity either to promote policy change within these countries or to promote regime change. It seems as if it may be fundamentally a more chaotic set of motivations. I don't want to be reductive when I say that by saying, oh, well, clearly he just wants to control the news cycle. There may be a bit of that, right? There may be a bit of that. I mean, we should invoke Iran, which obviously we're looking at the situation in Iran over the last, how many days has it been? 7 or 8?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We're looking at this with horror. I mean, the images are catastrophic for us. And one of the main things I want to talk about on this stream, of course, is where the anti-war movement is, why we're not seeing something return, what explains the lethargy, what explains the hesitation, what explains maybe even the inhibition on behalf of the left, or maybe those assumptions are wrong. But obviously for us, for me, and I imagine for you as well, I cut my teeth on the left, getting out and hitting the streets for mobilization against the Iraq war, right? Mm-hmm. Very important event for me, kind of generational defining event, right? So it seems as if perhaps also we need to talk about the kind of mass psychological effects that the COVID-19 pandemic has had on adjusting our kind of general psyches to social crisis, in the sense that we have a kind of lower threshold for so-called catastrophic activity in the social field. And perhaps that contributes to a kind of reticence or a kind of inhibition. Or perhaps we're entering a stage where social media and kind of mass protest movements are no longer what they used to be during the period of, say, the Arab Spring, right? Or even Occupy, right? Where the most successful thing we've seen recently was the anti-ICE protests in Minnesota, and those were successful because they were local. So, Tony, perhaps you might talk about that dynamic of the anti-war movement in particular at this moment, if you want to kick it from there, but you can also address some of these other dynamics too.
Let me just first say, because you brought it up on the question of soft power and the Doge dismantling of USAID in 2025, the VOA, the Voice of America, was part of that dismantling, and it has now been defunct except notably in the Persian language, which is the language that is spoken in Iran. And that is something to take note of. That seems to demonstrate that there was some sort of, you could have read the tea leaves if you looked at what Doge was doing in 2025 and seen that they were preserving that aspect of the VOA, very likely to assist in the efforts that we're currently seeing underway. Also, your commentary, both Sudip and Daniel, that what we're seeing is some sort of WWE or Hulk Hogan style spectacle, I think is not at all out of left field, because just as of in the last 24 hours, as of this stream, we've seen Trump endorse Jake Paul for some sort of political career. And we've also seen Kash Patel, who is the head of the FBI, say that the FBI is now going to be training with the UFC, the Ultimate Fighting Championship, led by Trump ally Dana White. So that sort of gives a direct political and economic demonstration, I guess, that what you have said about the WWE and Hulk Hogan and whatever, combat sports more generally, that's clearly on the table. That combat sports imbricated in U.S. politics more than ever before. Now, regarding the mass psychology, I think that it's possible that what we're seeing with this spectacle is a sort of attempt to spread panic and fear, both domestically and internationally, and that's not at all anything new in terms of U.S. foreign policy or U.S. military actions, but it perhaps is unique insofar as you mentioned that there seems to be a sort of incoherence in terms of the ideology that Trump is putting forward currently. He seems to be reaching for any sort of tactic that can be recycled from the history of the Cold War or the history of the wars in Iraq and in Afghanistan, in order to manufacture consent, not through the typical means of manufacturing consent for these sorts of actions, but through a sort of mass, as you put it, Daniel, mass psychology of, I can't remember exactly how you put it, lowering the threshold of catastrophe in order to sort of lubricate our psychological path toward which we can become so numb to these events and that we simply say, well, this is the new normal, as we did when COVID hit, or we can say, well, now I'm afraid for these sorts of things occurring on the mainland, which they seem to be happening ever more. That's sort of the parallel that Sudip and I are trying to get at in this piece when it comes to what's happening internationally and the U.S. U.S. strategies of imperialism and the U.S. strategies of fascism that are currently being employed in places like Minnesota and D.C. and California and elsewhere. There seems to be a parallel there. Also, keep in mind that in California, also as of the last 24 to 48 hours, there was some sort of warning about the potential Iran strike on the West Coast, which any mathematician or geographer will tell you was
drones too. Yeah,
drone strike. Yeah. We also think about the spectacle of this UFO phenomena, which has been crammed down our throats in mainstream media as of the last few years, as a sort of, I think, tactic to do this very thing that you're talking about, Daniel, which is some sort of manufacturing of psychological consent, wherein we sort of become conditioned to think that there's anomalous things happening in the skies that we can't understand, and there's a potential for an incursion to take place at any time, any place, from any foreign adversary, and so we should be ever vigilant. And that seems to be lubricating the path toward a false flag event of some kind. So I think all of that is on the table and should be taken into consideration when we think about all of the above.
I wonder if we might say a few things regarding the ideological camps of the Trump coalition, insofar as what we seem to have is the mega base, which, I guess is kind of represented by someone like Steve Bannon. And we're told that that was against neoconservative state building and intervention, right? That's what we were told. Mm-hmm. It's largely a domestic focus. It's, largely, the tariffs is a big strategy they use. They're against globalism. They're against, everything that, Wolfowitz and Bush stood for in terms of going into Iraq. Then we also do have, of course, Rubio and his own idiosyncratic, I think, kind of like ressentiment politics against Latin America, which has its own flavor of neoconservatism, which has kind of landed in the center of the Trump world, given that he's Secretary of State. We then have this kind of like braggadocio UFC Pete Hegseth character, who is, as far as I can tell, a kind of cartoonish figure, a kind of, it's very strange because, like most of us, we have people in our family from military, and like, I don't know anything about the military, but one thing I do know is that like Pete Hegseth is likely hated actually by the military, because this whole like kind of G.I. Joe UFC style, it's so like out of order in terms of like the general etiquette of military. I don't know if you've seen some of his press conferences. People in the chat are talking about how I think he uses AI to write his speeches, and it's so obvious.
Well, there's videos too. Like he does do. I just wanted to really quickly, just to add really quickly to what you said. I was gonna say the other thing about what's going on is definitely spectacle, and that's what I referenced too. But Trump is trying to say the Epstein files have shook him, I'm sure, and I think when it comes to distracting people, it's not really distracting the people. It's more like he now knows that he's on the defensive edge, but he has a coalition that still wants things, and they don't care. Sections of the people who he's not losing, like even Jacobin, I think, had a poll, a survey, and they produced an article. I didn't get to read all of it, but they had said that just maybe the average Trump voter, there's been some of them who've already dropped away, because it is ridiculous what he's doing. He's doing such ridiculous things that it doesn't make any sense, right? And even on the right wing, some of it has mutated into a form of anti-Zionism to a degree.
Right.
But he's trying to. But there's still people in his camp. Like, for instance, one thing is the extreme Christianity, evangelicalism,
right,
and the Zionism. Like for instance, in the State of the Union, he mentioned the Venezuela thing. Like, I went through it with my students, so I read it, unfortunately. And in it, he said some really, really intense things about Christianity. Obviously, Charlie Kirk was mentioned, and his wife, his ex-wife, who's struggling, is there. And then, but he also mentioned some things that were quite indicative of a crusader mindset. Like, for instance, he said that before the men who were sent over to Venezuela, one of whom was there, I think, and stood up, and his legs were hurt, but he was the one invading. Right. He said the dog tags were blessed by that, I think, that man's wife with holy water. That is not a mistake of language. And this is Donald Trump. They all know he's a charlatan. They all know that he's a liar, but they're doing the whole spectacle for themselves and sections of their base,
right,
who are still believing in the one thing that they hold true, which is once Israel, I guess, is complete and it's greater Israel is formed, Jesus Christ will come down and things will go up. What I'm saying is that just like typical fascists do, they don't provide any real material things. They always provide, this is the essence of fascism, a sort of postmodernism too. Like, there's nothing real here. This is about the next world. And I think, I just want to say, because you mentioned Rubio, I mean, he talks about his faith, and to Anthony's point earlier about his speech in Europe, I read that as well, and he talked a lot about the Western civilization. He mentioned Christianity again, and a particular type, and the whole recasting of the story doesn't obviously mention Native people, it doesn't offer anything, but it's about faith, it's about patriarchy, it's about loyalty to this ridiculous idea of Western civilization too. Like, I joke with my students, the Romans and the Greeks, and a shout out to all the Southern Europeans out there watching, back in the day of that timeline they're trying to explain, none of those people would have thought of themselves in the same way as white or European or Western as these as these jokers are trying to undo. Like, oh, we're all part. Like, they're trying to strangulate history and connect thousands of years ago of Roman thought to now. And one of the patterns that's connected them is Christianity, which goes into also how some of these Republicans and some Democrats, but Republicans are just going all in on the anti-Muslim stuff. So I just wanted to raise that really quickly. There are constituencies that he's trying to appeal to. Not everyone. I think most people are just apathetic and overwhelmed. But I think there's a section of his constituency that are viewing this war against Venezuela, against Iran as part of a holy war, to be quite honest with you.
Right. I feel like what you just said reminded me of this. I don't know if you remember this.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Remember this?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
This is very symbolic, and I want your comment on this, Tony. Like,
Sure.
You know, how do you analyze this? This to me is so shameless, so degraded, so without historical conscience, and so, I mean, it's not even conservative. It's not. It's so just sad. I mean, it's what, why, you know, what, how do you analyze, like, he's making a symbolic choice to take something which we universally recognize as Americans as like a sin of what we did to the native people. If you don't recognize that, then I don't even know how you can even think of, you know what I mean? Like, it's just, and even like if you take somebody like George W. Bush, you know, George W. Bush said, we're going to do a war in Iraq, but there's good Muslims and there's bad Muslims, right? We're going to work with the good ones, right? Clash of Civilizations was the concept, right? And now it's like they don't even have the pretense to build a rapport with the savages.
No.
Right? So-called. So I'll kick it to you, Tony. How do you analyze something like this?
Well, just before I say something about that, let me also mention that you had this tactic during the French Second Republic wherein Napoleon III was very interested in preserving a sort of pan-European identity through the idea of Latin lineage. That's, in the 19th century, was a sort of veil for this concept of whiteness, which was not even in utero, but which was already sort of developing, and that was one way in which, in this case, France sort of became stitched into that identity in the years after 1848. We also saw it earlier in the 18th century, with Thomas Jefferson, who also traced the origins of U.S. society and the Republican project back to Roman society. He even made, all the federal buildings have that style with the Roman pillars and so on. And you see it in the Monticello architecture for these reasons, because the United States had no early ruins with which to trace its identity, like Europe has, right? These ancient ruins, which it can develop its identity over time. The United States didn't have those. At least the United States didn't have those at the time of the White Slaveholders Rebellion therein. And so he traced this lineage back to this romantic Roman past. And Trump also attempted to make Roman-style architecture once again the official architecture of federal buildings that was during his first presidency. So I just wanted to mention that because the point that this connects with the Marco Rubio point from the Munich Security Conference last month that Sudip was just talking about, because that idea that Europe and America share this mystical lineage is something that has precedent way back in history, centuries ago, and he's just bringing it back again in the 21st century. Now, at this point, on Wounded Knee and Pete Hegseth, I would redirect all of your listeners to open up their browsers and type in Nick Estes' name, Nickestes, and then the title of a recent piece by him called Indian Wars Or no, I'm forgetting what it's called. Excuse me. Let's see if I find it. U.S. imperialism is an Indian war, where he's examining the idea of what laid the sort of legal and policy groundwork for the forever wars that the U.S. has been waging, from the war on terror and so forth, and the war in Iran, war with Iran currently. What laid the legal and policy groundwork for these undeclared wars? It was Indian wars in the 18th and 19th centuries. And so what we see with Pete Hegseth is a similar sort of thing here. It's no accident that he renames the Department of Defense the Department of War, whilst he is returning the medals of honor to these individuals, soldiers who participated in the slaughter of Native Americans. And it's also not an accident to consider that the missiles that were being launched and struck a school in Iran just days ago, killing hundreds of school children. It was called a Tomahawk missile. That is a clear relic of the U.S. Indian Wars, an early iteration of imperialism, some have argued, I think correctly, and a testament to the way in which the mass slaughter of the indigenous is still par for the course when it comes to the U.S. military in the 21st century.
Right, and it seems as if the Hegseth logic, if we want to kind of identify it as a logic, other than a kind of like naked machismo, I don't know, kind of like pre-Oedipal, kind of adolescent, a kind of adolescent masculinity, right? A kind of frustrated adolescent masculinity, which is almost like cosplaying or kind of like pretending to be masculine. Because why I say pretending is precisely because there's no recognition of a social level of shame of our own collective actions. There's no sense of responsibility to the other at all. And in fact, there's a sense in which, according to them, what so-called wokeism has done, right, has threatened to sap the kind of vitality of the American war machine. And the more we flex that muscle, because we've somehow forgotten how to use it because of wokeism, the more true to ourselves we will be. But in order to be true to ourselves, we need to have a historical memory without any shame for what we've done. Our historical memory should be almost like a pure, it's a very Nietzschean view. It's a very blonde beast. It's a very kind of vulgar Nietzschean view, frankly. Frankly, it very much is.
Sure. I think it's also a very white supremacist view. And that is not to be forgotten either. That these individuals have cozied themselves, the Trump administration more generally, and the Trump campaign since its early days have cozied themselves up to the white supremacist reactionary forces in the United States. And Pete Hegseth is an emblem thereof. You can see that when he's parading around in these photographs without his shirt on, where you can see some of his symbols represented on his tattoos, and you can look at his policy and some of his orders in the military to see what I'm talking about. Also, these people, they think that they understand whiteness as being under attack, right? And so they decry this thing called wokeism, and they, as Daniel has just been talking about, and they decry anything that has the patina of quote unquote identity, that is to say identity politics, without understanding whiteness as an identity politics, as the identity politics of in a militant sort of identity politics that is hell-bent on not only preserving the European American legacy, lineage, spiritually, religiously, and so forth that we've been talking about, but also just centralize once again the white supremacist project as front and center to the American project and to the Western Hemisphere as a project. So I think that is pretty clearly what's going on with Pete Hegseth.
Right. No, it's very well said, and I just want to highlight your piece with Professor Gerald Horne, who's been on Emancipations to talk about his wonderful book on the American Revolution. For comrades, if you check out Emancipations podcast and you search Gerald Horne, you'll find our very interesting conversation there. Sudip, I want to kick it back to you, and I want to kind of raise this question about protest, the anti-war movement, where we're at with this. First, you take a thinker like Eric Blanc, who is a very prominent figure in the DSA kind of network. And I like a lot of his work. He's a labor historian. He's done a lot of good work on the history of Bolshevism. He's an interesting figure. He recently came out with a piece on his Substack that argues that one of the reasons why we don't have a more robust anti-war movement against the Iran war, he listed, I think, 6 or 7 reasons, but one of them caught my interest, and I want to ask you about it. He said that ultra-leftism is partially to blame. And he gave the example of like leftists that criticize AOC for being like too pro-Israel. And he thought, well, in reality, AOC is not. She is opposed to the war in Iran. She is opposed to Israel, etc. And so I got the conclusion from him that he wanted to say that, well, we need to kind of work with the progressive elements of the Democratic Party, kind of coalesce around them to create a large anti-war movement. So how do you interpret that line of argumentation? I have my own thoughts, and I'm sure Tony does too, but do you agree with Eric Blanc's assessment and point about ultra-leftism as holding it back?
No. Yeah, so sorry, I was on mute for a little, just because otherwise I just say things like, wow, that's, I interpret. I do want to go just double back really quickly to the previous quote by Wounded Knee, just really quickly. I do think, because it connects to Israel, I do think in the last few years, because Israel has been extremely explicit in its own conquering, it's doubled back into the forces here that have to also kind of meet that. Because I think there is a convergence here, right? On the Israel side, they are kind of saying, yeah, we're going to conquer you. This is what we're supposed to do. This land is for us. And it's the same thing. I just want to put that in there because it's not coincidental that once this new genocide restarted, we've been seeing the wheels turning even faster towards this more explicit version of that on this side, right? So I just wanted to
we didn't mention Gaza as a precursor to this, which is essential. And I would say one other essential point is the 12-day war.
Yeah.
Could explain why the left feels like, well, maybe Trump will be one and done and it'll be over.
Right.
Because he's already indicated he wants to get out. So we don't need to take to the street or something like that.
Well, that is part of Eric Blanc's thing. So I'll also say that I do like some of Eric Blanc's work. I am a doctoral candidate myself in political science at Rutgers, so I teach at Rutgers. And I teach on the same campus pretty much as Eric Blanc. So I think I don't know if I've crossed paths with him, but he seems like a good guy. I do agree with you. Some of his work is very good. But I do have some disagreements with some of his analyses. So for instance, the article he wrote is on his Substack, and he did mention some things I do agree with. One of which is, I do think, quite honestly, the reason why we're not seeing an anti-war movement as robust as it was even during the Iraq War, which some have said, including him, had more support publicly. This is like 38% of people, normal people. I think whoever is getting interviewed still as Republicans over the phone or whatever, those are a very, very, crazy minority of people, to be honest, in some ways. But 38% don't support this war. That's pretty astounding, first of all. That's an amazing leverage point for us. And yet this is why the question comes up, like, what's not happening, right? The Iraq war had at least, I think, 70%, as he wrote, and still you had millions and millions and millions of people. I do want to say one of the things he said that was quite correct is probably because there's like succession of so many crazy events, and one of which is the ICE stuff too. So I wrote down really quickly some material reasons to build off of Eric, because I don't think he said this exactly. Quite frankly, people are scared of speaking out, because what preceded this war in Iran has been several years now of attacks on speech for those people who just don't want to say free Palestine, right? So those are really material things. People have lost their jobs. If you're a Palestinian American and you even just want to be, I don't know, exist, and you might disagree with someone at the workplace and say, hey, you just said something very racist, or even something nicer, like, hey, can I talk to you? There's a good chance that you can be taken to HR and everyone will disbelieve you. That is a very big reality, right? And I also think connected to that, in my experience in New Jersey, which has a significant population of Arab Americans, Muslims, a lot of people are also a bit tired, because during that start of the Gaza war, people did lose family members, bless you. People did lose family members. That is also one thing that Eric doesn't really talk. I think one thing I get frustrated by certain social democrats of this type is that when they argue about these points of what matters or shouldn't matters, they create a very thick line between domestic and foreign. And I mean by people. Like, for instance, I'm not Iranian or Palestinian. I am Indian American. I'm Bengali. I have family members abroad. A lot of people here have family members abroad, and a lot of them were affected by this prior. So that's some of that. So going back to what I agree with him, some people are tired, admittedly so. Now, ICE is stuff. ICE was the other level that starts to create this fear, because I have to be honest, I'm a citizen. I'm born, raised Queens. I was getting worried myself as a brown person who's American going out there and doing a protest. That's me. I can't even imagine if you're Muslim. Forget what status you are. If you're like me, born and raised here, I could imagine you're still scared. So those are the material realities I think is really happening. This has been a concerted shadow of the war on terror, really, really doing its work now on people. Like, people are tired, right? Now, where I disagree is the ultra-leftism. Now, I do think there are forms of ultra-leftism, because I'm not an ultra-leftist. I'm a Marxist-Leninist. There are forms of ultra-leftism that I don't exactly agree with all the time. Like, for instance, a complete refusal to deal with government. I don't think that's realistic. People do need things to happen in the interim, like even saving Medicaid. But where I found frustrating in this piece is where he describes the thing about Eric. Sometimes he sort of wants to live in two worlds. He wants to tone police people about how they should reckon with the genocide, while also coming out saying he's pretty much as progressive as them. So then he uses the term ultra-leftism to be that straw man in a sense, right? And I'll say this as someone who was dabbling in uncommitted. It wasn't ultra-leftism that demobilized people. It was, again, losing family members. I saw also Arab Americans, Muslim, Christian, other, who were just tired every day, seeing videos of people, kids missing limbs, parents cradling their children, fathers crying after just coming back getting milk. I don't want to get emotional, but that is the reality. And then from that position, they were also tired, or I've seen it, where people like Eric, maybe with that point of view, unwittingly, not saying they were doing this deliberately, not paying attention to that, and sometimes already beginning the process of tone policing, meaning, hey, Bernie's gonna run, like, or AOC, like this article says, or don't do this or don't say that. So we got to win this election, right? That was what I thought was demobilizing, because if you remember, when October 8th went down and 9th and 10th, there were actually a lot of Palestinians and Arab Americans in DC protesting. There was a burgeoning movement off the bat, but immediately it was attacked, even from sections of the liberal left, for being like too reckless. So that's what I saw as the real issue, was that Palestinian and Arab Americans not being, I wouldn't say not being listened to, because you can also still have liberal Arab Americans, and I'm not into that, but certain Arab Americans who just wanted to say, hey, Palestinians have a right to resist, especially as Israel tanks pour over the so-called border between Israel proper and Gaza. Even those things I saw other people saying, hey, let's keep it down a notch. And that is what I thought was quite demobilizing, because as a human being, you're basically being told, hey, of all the groups of people in the world, including Ukrainians at that same timeline, you don't even deserve the right to say you deserve to defend yourself. I find that very soul-sucking. So that's my disagreement with this piece and with what Eric kind of raised.
Yeah, I mean, briefly, and then I'll kick it to you, Tony. But I guess this line of argumentation kind of has a certain pessimistic foundation to it as I read it. Insofar as what you often hear is that in order for large-scale mobilization against war to take place, some will argue, I'm not saying Blanc says this, but you see this a lot, that you need like the threat of a draft to like truly throw cold water on the face of Americans and mobilize them in this way. It's like a direct interference in their self-interest and livelihood and so on. So you hear that. I think the other thing that you hear is that, and I'm somewhat sympathetic to this view, although I struggle with it, which is the question of minority-driven, campus-led anti-war politics. Here's the challenge with it. I think this is a real challenge, which is that the machinery of culture war politics, and Trump is kind of excels at this par excellence, right? Is able to portray those righteous actions on campus as like, you know, the reserve of like private elite school privileged kids and wokeism and all of that. And then you get the Zionist component as part of that, which is even more pernicious in terms of actually taking away the civil liberties of students. And you sort of, that's how the right kind of kneecaps, right? So I think we do have a reality in which a lot of social movements have an incubatory origin in the post-war period, you could say, in general, right? Since World War II, on campuses. It's true of the sexual revolution in a lot of ways. It's true of the anti-Vietnam War movement in a lot of ways, right? So Tony, how do we deal with that reality? How do we sort of take that reality that campus protest is germinal and fundamental to any anti-war movement, while not allowing it to get kind of seized by the culture war industry?
Well, it's an interesting question because I don't see a way to curtail what the right does with the movements, and I also don't see it as our responsibility to do so. I think that there would be that sort of usage, twisting toward those ends that you're speaking to of campus movements, regardless of if they are minority-led or not. I think that the efforts that you have been describing that we saw take place during the anti-genocide encampment movements, for instance, I think that would happen regardless of. I don't think that we are in control of that at all. So I think that the doxing of students of color at Harvard by right-wing funded forces like Bill Ackman, the chemical attacks and the physical attacks on student protesters at UCLA, funded by Ackman and Jerry Seinfeld, or Jerry Seinfeld's wife, if I'm not mistaken, talking about Zionist-led sort of counter-protests or right-wing, counter-revolutionary activities. I think that's going to happen regardless. I don't think because of the persistence and the prevalence of whiteness in U.S. politics, and it's the very thing that has kept the labor movement and someone like Blanc, whose name here is, I guess, a bit ironic, for anyone who speaks French. I don't know Blanc, by the way. I also don't know his work. So this is the first time I believe I'm reading anything by him. But that seems to be a factor that needs to be taken into consideration as something that has kept the labor movement in the United States from cohering in a certain sense and achieving tremendous victories, even though it has achieved tremendous victories historically, was this question of racism, this question of whiteness. So I think that's important to take into consideration also. I don't actually know what Blanc means by provocative rhetoric in this piece. I don't remember reading anything by him about ultra-leftism in this particular piece. If he's making allusions to ultra-leftism vis-a-vis the notion of provocative rhetoric, I'd like him to give examples, because I'm not really sure what he means. And I don't want to intimate or speculate on what he means, but I'll take you guys' word for it. And I would just like to know what he means by provocative.
I think I can give some examples of what he means. He means support for Hamas. He means from the river to the sea chants. That's the stuff that he means. He means, I think, taking positions that will, that's what I mean by minority. I don't mean minority as in minorities. I mean,
right.
Well, I mean taking positions that are in the minority ideologically.
Oh, I see.
That's what he means. So he means like supporting Hamas, or he means like, okay, now this is a real question, right? So like, okay, we have no idea an accurate number regarding what the Iranian regime, in terms of people that they killed in the recent uprisings before February 28th assassination of Khamenei. We don't know. Some say 2,000, some say 40,000, right? Now, how does one on the left go about not falling into what we call campism, where we have a kind of totally uncritical fidelity to the Iranian regime and so on? It's a very, very, very complex position of solidarity to have. Does that make sense? So I think that he's opposed to that kind of like campism, if you want to call it that. I mean, go ahead, Sudip, please.
The reason why I get frustrated with him, so the river to sea, yeah, I was about to mention that, Anthony. That's one of his problems. So that's why, so the river to the sea thing is like, I mean, the overturn, okay. At some point, we also need to push certain things, otherwise we won't. That's why we're in the same problem we are with every other issue that comes up. Like, if it's not for Palestine, now it's going to be Iran, and then we'll have to start the whole narrative over for certain people. But I also want to say, for certain Palestinians who want to say river to the sea, that is their right. So that's one other thing that Blanc does not seem to get. And that's why I mentioned the demobilizing things I saw firsthand with Palestinian Americans who are actually not even so-called radical. They just want to say, I want my ancestral land back. Things like that are just very material things with that slogan, right? In terms of Iran and how do we deal with certain, like, I know you're asking a bigger question about just overall campism, I guess. One, it's not so much like denying Iran has its issues, but I think what frustrates me with Blanc, it's a dovetail, but he doesn't really do the same thing when he asks people to vote for Biden. You see what I'm saying? Like, there doesn't seem to be, I think I'd be more, I know this is not what you're saying, but if someone like you were to bring this up, then obviously I would feel more of a sincere engagement about these questions. But with me, I always start to see red, because I don't think because if you think about it, Biden's government and certainly Trump's government has a lot of blood on its hands, quite literally. So it's like, he never seems to write an engagement of that perspective. Like, there's a lot of assumptions that he doesn't, the assumptions that he has is also wedded, ironically, to its own minority view, because literally Kamala lost. Biden didn't do so well. Like, so it's like an inverse relation. That's why I'm just a little bit like frustrated when I hear him talk about these things. It's like, okay, well, Iran, because the term authoritarian, I know we've talked maybe previously about that gets tossed around, which is also very vacuous and meaningless. And then there's been certain attempts by certain people to even bring that to Cuba's door for some reason. But with Iran, right now, what we do know, even though the numbers are funky about what the government has done, what we do know is this. 1,700 Iranians have been killed, right? Israel wants Iran to be a Syria. And currently, at least initially, Trump wanted Iran to be Venezuela, which is sort of a self-contained thing now. And even though Blanc might think some people are turned off, I mean, he also just proved the numbers. Like in his own article, he just showed the numbers saying that a lot of people aren't turned on to the war. So like, you know, in some ways he also projects this idea of an activist, which is also confusing because I'm wondering where he's organizing, who's like out there being like, hey, the Iranian regime, pretty dope, right? I've never seen that. If you have 38% of people not liking this war, that already disproves the notion that people are being turned off. And also, really quickly, the Epstein class, like even the Iranian government has said, this is a war by the Epstein class. Like Maduro and Flores won't be in the Epstein files. If they were, it's probably because Epstein and his buddies are clowning them, right? A lot of the Iranian people aren't there, right? Who is in there? Obviously Trump, and then the Saudis, the Gulf countries, all these other forces. So it's like Blanc is right to say we need to maybe sometimes think about the wider perspective beyond the campus, which is where I come to believe you still need a material force to fight back. And it's not just campus politics. But where I get a little bit strung up before I even get to that question is all the other things he assumes along the way. Like, you know, which is confusing. Like, oh, the average American is consumed by what's going to happen. Like the Iranian government. I mean, sure, if he's listening to Iranian diaspora on TV who are waving MAGA flags and saying they don't care if their grandmother is dead. But again, 38%. And that's probably higher, I think, based on how these polls are done, who support this war. So why even go to this direction? I would argue it's about all the other things in terms of the fear, the material fear of what might happen to you. Because again, we've seen it. I feel scared about speaking up for Palestine. And now with Iran, like sometimes I get in a quandary of like, my girlfriend and I have discussed because of my background in politics, what would happen to me if, say, I was at a protest and something was to happen. So Blanc is like living in this other world where we're just like, I don't know, like still strategists in this war room of politics when the war is here and there's a lot of other assumptions he himself needs to like pull back from. Sorry, I just had to say a couple of things even before. I know you're asking a deeper question, but with me, it's Blanc has a lot of assumptions. I just wanted to lay out.
It's always very hard to roll a kind of theoretical critique of ultra-leftism that's reliant on the Harringtonite strategy of cooperation with the Democratic Party. And so it sort of inverts, it's an inverted Leninism. It's like, it's an ultra-leftism, which is nothing that Lenin meant by that. Precisely in the sense that the Democratic Party is nothing close to a socialist party. It's definitely nothing close to a Leninist party. And so what you get is a sense that, well, we need to be the responsible adults in the room so that as good social democrats, we can convince, it's a kind of like popular frontist ideology or strategy, where we can convince the centrists that our ideology is of the majority, and the popular antagonism against your policies, whether that be Medicare for all, whether that be war and imperialism, whether that be economic inequality across the board, we social democrats are the responsible ones. And you can allow us, you know, as parents, that's the problem with his model. It's that it still needs the parents. It still has this paternal reliance. And that's the horror of this kind of popular front liberal détente. And I wanted to ask you, Tony, what you think about that. How do we get out of, if we can, that kind of legacy of what we might call a kind of neo 21st century popular frontism, in which we seem unable to create a new party, a new socialist party, and we seem to have a certain fatalistic reliance on the Democrats? How do you, I've actually asked Dr. Horn about this, by the way, in my interview with him. It was very interesting what he said. How do you analyze that kind of quagmire, and what comes up when you think about that?
Well, I obviously think about this question of ultra-leftism and electoral politics in the United States context with the understanding that we have a very rigid sort of electoral framework to work with. I also think about that in terms of not granting electoral politics an undue or oversized or outsized influence or role or reliance for the left progressive forces in the United States. It should be something that we consider strategically. And so I have some sympathies with the critique of ultra-leftism and when it comes to electoralism, certainly. And so actually I found much of what Blanc was writing in this piece to be very agreeable. Now, when it comes to sectarianism, I don't know, because I have a hard time just looking at slogans, granting slogans also sort of an outsized political role or influence when it comes to some of these movements. I just don't see it. Maybe I'm a subject to the sort of psychological warfare that Daniel was talking about earlier when it comes to becoming numb to that sort of thing. I just don't see these things as that radical to say. I mean, I think that this actually represents the norm and represents sort of the majority at this point, given what Israel has done in Gaza and given what the United States has done to enable this genocide. And I actually don't agree with the analysis on that level. I don't see this as being that extreme when you're talking about popular front politics. I feel like the Popular Front is anti-genocide. And so I just disagree with him at that level. If I'm to have a disagreement at all, it would be that. Now, when it comes to AOC, which is actually the question you asked originally, but it ties in with this other question. If I'm not mistaken, in this piece, Blanc says that he sort of criticizes the left for being too critical of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who he claims has not voted for any military funding for Israel, for instance. And I just don't think that's correct, actually.
She supported the Iron Dome, which itself is its own version of backing of an apartheid state. Well, I mean, so, yeah.
She voted, I could be wrong, someone needs to check me on this, but she voted against a bill that would have blocked some funding for Israeli defense from the United States. And that, by the law of double negation, you and your audience probably already understand this, that's an affirmative when it comes to providing defense spending to Israel.
It's kind of like Kautsky abstaining from war credits.
I mean,
it is though.
It's exactly
she voted present.
Exactly that. Yeah, I mean,
kind of like that.
So I think that's a great analogy too, and
right.
So I think that he should recalibrate his analysis on those terms. Look again at what DSA said about AOC's vote. So his own party base, if I'm not mistaken, was critical of AOC on these terms. Was that an ultra-leftist move to critique AOC for this vote or non-vote, whatever it might be, for enabling?
Right.
I think,
or even here, like if you really wanted to roll the Popular Front strategy out and have it be successful, I don't understand the logic. Like if you want to go all the way and you say we are, left, we are the left, we have these universal principles, we will keep you morally in check. Like for me, I don't think we should work with the Democrats at all because they cannot be trusted. But let's pretend that we do take that approach, and we have to then ask ourselves, then, okay, look at this here. Did you guys see this? It came out. Yeah. It turns out that in fact, it's very likely that Kamala Harris lost the election due to their complicity, Biden and hers complicity with Gaza. That's just that seems to be a fact, a reality, and so on. So it doesn't make sense to me that the ultra left, like if it's going to be this Popular Front thing, DSA and like leftists in general cooperate with the Democrats. We're the kind of moral voice of the Democrats. Even at that logic, it doesn't make sense because you would have to then rally a counterpoint to speak to at least the conscience of voters, because the conscience of voters decided the election and brought us Donald Trump. The genocide did that. That seems to be a fact. So you see my point. Like, why would we then? That's what I don't understand. The thing, it's like this Jacobin DSA Eric Blanc line is like, be good, obedient leftists. Don't make too much of a noise.
Well,
don't critique AOC too much.
Well, also it's they might have their own politics. Like I said earlier, I think Blanc has, like to what Anthony also said, has made good points, and it's just this tinier section that turns out to be very weird. But I also think, like I said earlier, Blanc is himself trying to do a double dance. He's trying to represent himself as being on our side or on the person's side, and he's also trying to explain, hey, but for the interim, don't say this and this and this. But I would also say, well, I say this really sincerely to not just Blanc, but to those folks, just own up to your ideas and say that you believe in an electoral style of change, and that's fine. I prefer when people just say what they want. Because right now I think that he is also caught between those contradictions, because I think he really just believes AOC is the way to go, or Zoran's the way to go. But ironically, even with Zoran's win, if Zoran Mamdani, how he's going to run New York City is going to be different than what he campaigned. That's just how all elections are done in the US because of capitalism and stupidity and forces. But how he ran is kind of interesting, because he actually disproves Eric Blanc to a degree himself. Because when he first came on the scene, he was just a DSA person, an assembly person. He was a taxi cab alliance person. And he said, even in his interviews, that the Israeli apartheid state is the reason it opened a lot of his eyes. Like, he uses, I think, those terms. Like, I've gone through it with my students. So Zoran was using this language that maybe a Blanc would have said, hey, Zoran in the crowd, I know you're polling at 2%, but if you want to get to 5 or 10, you gotta tone it down and all that. But he didn't really for a large time. No. And then if you look at his voting base, so I'm originally from Queens, born, raised in Queens, quite proud of this. But at the same time, like, I'm also from Jersey, but my girlfriend jokes she has never met a person more proud of being from Jersey than me. I don't know what that means, but what that says about me. But in Queens, where I grew up, a lot of Desi folks, a lot of South Asian folks, a lot of Arab folks, they didn't vote. And if you remember, one of Zoran's first videos was about going around, I think, Jackson Heights and asking South Asians about, or brown folks, Latinos and Asians, about who they voted for, including some Trump people. That was his viral video that came out, and people were like, oh, check out this guy. He's very good at extracting that understanding between people, and also challenging. Like, he wasn't trying to be like, oh, that's great. Like, he was being like, well, what about this and this and this? And do you feel seen? And some of these voters said, no, I don't already. They're like, I don't like this. But some of them did admit some things that later on his campaign would take off from. But he did not back down on his criticism of Israel or I don't want to use this term lightly, virtue signaling, because I do think he's sincere, but signaling that he's also part of that milieu, if that makes sense. And if you look at the numbers, the majority of South Asians who are registered, whether it be Hindu, Muslim, or Christian, because it was like 90%, they all voted for him. They all ran to him. And his father is Mahmoud Mandani, good Muslim, bad Muslim author. Like, this is a lot of things that Blanc doesn't seem to understand. Like, he seems to either want to just cut the cord between history and say this is where it starts, or he doesn't want to admit. And I'm not, and if Eric is listening to this, I'm not saying about you, just generally I guess a royal Eric, like a wider version of Eric's. Their side doesn't seem to just want to admit that maybe they just want to have a particular kind of electoral social democrat running, a Bernie Sanders. Because, when Zoran won, or when he was running, then there was the Bernie Sanders influence creeping in. So they were trying to curtail him with this real social democrat. And if you remember, Bernie himself was quite, angry about those protesters. And so I think there's a lot of things that also Blanc has in his back pocket that work against his argument that he thinks is actually on his side. I think if Zoran came out and said, I also support Israel, or when they asked him those questions, he would have lost. He was the only candidate on every debate, that said, I am not a mayor of Tel Aviv, I'm a mayor of New York City. And that's what did it. And then also at the beginning phase, when the New York media was saying, globalize the intifada, and of course they're trying to spill that into jihad, he did do a little bit of backing, but he also initially did say, I am not speaking in these terms that you're using. And in his inaugural speech, he did say, I am Muslim, and these are things that are being attacked. So again, there is this sort of weird historical amnesia that I think comes from a place of just denying what you really want. And that's just my view.
Right. No, it's really good. It's Cold War liberalism. Had the view that the American soul is like some centrist. And like, I've never, So they always want to win the center, win the moderate, right?
Well said.
Right. Yeah. And I think it's totally false. Like, if you read Prisoners of the American Dream by Mike Davis, He
Yes.
begins the book by saying that in the Ronald Reagan era, some mass majority of the working class totally just refused to vote. So the idea that we have this like capacity, it's a very technocratic mindset to think that we can orchestrate the perfect, most balanced, most moderate, without any heart, without any blood, sweat, and tears, without any humanity. No, I mean, if anything, Donald Trump opened up the scene and he showed that people that double down on their convictions are the ones who are successful, right? And in fact, we are out of Cold War liberalism in the sense that Zoran doubled down on the socialism signifier, and look where it got him. He's now the most liked politician, I think, next to Sanders in the country.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not true anymore that socialism is this boogeyman word, and I think we owe him a bit to that. And we also technically owe Disney, because his mom got him a job when he was younger to teach him how to speak in front of a camera. And he's very good at it. Very good at it. And I don't really care. I don't care if he's from a big bourgeois background. Like, I think he's actually helping us.
Yeah,
frankly.
yeah.
He really is. He really is helping us. And I think, so I mean, look, I put the title of what we can do. Part of what we're talking about is kind of like why we're in a whiplash moment, why there seems to be some degree of apathy. But I'm wondering, Tony, if you have thoughts on like what practical action people can do. For example, boycotts against OpenAI and their complicity in the war. It may be that the strike on the Iranian school that killed the children was an AI error. We don't know. It could be that Israel wanted to give the Americans bad intelligence to initiate them into the war with this sinful act. We don't know. So there's boycott, right? There's street mobilization. Seems to me that street mobilization has other preconditions. It's not like we can just magically make that appear. But maybe you might speak to some of those more practical things about what we can do in this moment.
I certainly think that if mass boycotts can be organized, and to speak to some of the very positive and I think agreeable points in Blanc's article, mobilizing is not the same as organizing. Organizing requires a sort of more protracted process of engagement with a collective body than a singular mobilization for a cause of some kind. So the planning of boycotts, and I think it's called Quit GPT, which is a movement to split from the usage of chat bots, whatever they're called. Of course, I mean, those things are important. And then also keep in mind what worked very well in Minnesota was the form of the general strike, which was employed at the tail end of some of that movement, of that anti-ICE out movement in Minnesota. It worked tremendously, and that's a testament to that strategy and the involvement of mass politics with the labor movement to facilitate these sorts of anti-fascist and anti-imperialist ends. And we have to think on that front, at the dual front this represents. It's really a single front, two arms or something like that. The domestic and the international are really two sides of the same front, two sides of the same coin. And the general strike in the Minnesota context really proved the viability of that option moving forward. So we need a robust labor movement. I would assume that Blanc clearly would agree with that. Again, I find a lot agreeable in what Blanc has written in this piece. I actually don't find much that's disagreeable. I find some stuff that I disagree with on a nuanced sense. But
yeah,
there's a lot here that's simply pragmatic politics, and he's offering, a plethora, well, really 6 or 7 sort of theses on what is to be done with regard to the rebuilding and revitalizing movement. And I think that they're all pretty good, Backing up just for a second, though, the thing we need to avoid is this sort of recourse to moralism, and the recourse to subjectivism, which is what the notion of the sloganizing and the performative rhetoric, or whatever it's called, seems to really flirt with. There's a flirtation with the idea that I can make singular individual choices about my word usage, my language usage, and that is somehow contributing to a political cause. I don't think so. I think that flirts too much with what, to speak of Lenin again, we used to call bourgeois moralism and subjectivism. I don't think that that's really a viable option. It's sort of similar to when you hear this really, you maybe don't hear it as much anymore, but you likely will moving forward. Do you condemn do you condemn Hamas, or do you condemn the regime in Iran? This is immaterial politics. That's really, it's not the right question to ask, and certainly the answer to that question is not useful because it's simply a recourse to individuated bourgeois moralism. And so I think I agree with this author that we need to re-engage mass politics at the level of labor, which we have been doing, obviously, in this country in recent years to tremendous successes from coast to coast. I think we need to sharpen those tools and keep May 1st, 2028 in our minds, wherein we have planned a sort of mass general strike. If you look at Sean Fain's injunction from a couple years ago to keep that particular date in mind, if you are a labor organizer or in charge of negotiations or in charge of drafting collective bargaining agreements, try to calibrate your negotiations when those agreements will be suspended to that particular date, May 1st, 2028. And that might be to our great benefit to fomenting a mass labor movement.
Sudip, I want to invite you to jump in as well. I would also say a couple of things too, just briefly. There is a need to combat Islamophobia.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that can also take a cultural angle, because the levels of like anti-Muslim sentiment are pretty profound, actually, if you actually look at like what people say. And this is kind of compounded by the deterioration in American public school systems and its quality. The fact that Americans don't have the extra money to vacation, although, you know, the Muslim population has grown, still about maybe 1.5% of the total population at best. But, you know, that's a reality as well. You know, the algorithms exclude the Iranian content. But I would say, you know, since 1979, the Iranian Revolution, right, has been the source of a profound political demonization, which is different than the Islamophobic demonization that you get, say, of like against Wahhabism. No, the Iranian has its own flavor precisely because it was successful politically. And that has led to also the fact that the diaspora of Iranians tend to have very, very dismal politics, not across the board. It's very intergenerationally split, but it is quite unfortunate. And those voices are given massive platforms on NPR. I was listening to all of the coverage of NPR. It's kind of using this liberal identity politics in a way to promote a kind of liberal support for the imperialism. I don't know if you noticed that. Like, you're going to center the Iranian voices, and, you know, they do all of that whole performative thing and that moralistic thing, but it's actually like in the name of a kind of pernicious imperialism. In fact,
you're being actually racist if you don't allow us to want to have bombs kill our grandmothers, you know, or kill some of that's the basic. I just wanted to add a couple of things to that point, because what you mentioned, Black Liberation Media, great space. They have an amazing morning show, and they always harp on reality TV as well, aside from the other propaganda mechanisms. So there's also shows out there like Shahs of Sunset, which I think focuses on Persian, and I say Persian Americans who have had millions and millions of households, unfortunately vulnerable to their spewing of specific lines about their homeland Iran lost to the 1979 revolution. Now, again, to your earlier point, can we condemn the Ayatollahs? Yes. I mean, not condemn. Can we criticize? Yes, of course. We're Marxist-Leninists. They killed a lot of lefties. But also, a funny thing, I'm not really in favor of the Shah either. And I'm also not in favor of allowing these Persians go around saying it's okay to kill schoolgirls in Iran. So, but the point being, they have had apparatus. Like, I think Shahs of Sunset, people watch reality TV show and I think I remember watching maybe one video or something else related to Iranians or Persians in LA. And it was astounding. Even when I didn't have my politics formed like they are now, even I was like thinking, I'm not sure what they're saying is right. Because the stories like the sad violins play, in 1979, we had to leave all our servants behind and all our gold couches, And so then they come here and they say things to, to everybody around them who may not know better. This isn't just about people who are on their side, but people who might be like, hey, I'd like to know about Iran. What's going on? Why is it the way it is? They're like, oh, let me tell you, 50 million Iranians were killed in one fell swoop. It's like, okay, I'll trust you, fine. But the other thing is the war on terror. And I'll tell you, this is worse than the shadow of 9/11 immediately for me. I mean, I was like 11 or 12 when that happened, and it was pretty bad for several years afterwards. I mean, I'm Hindu. I faced 1% of what Muslims have to face, and even other people who are Sikh, who are not Muslims have to face. But we faced some too, and it was pretty horrible. Like, it's shaped my life, honestly. Like the ways that I get sweaty and get worried and anxious from certain scenarios comes from those several years of just having people throw trash at our door and other people's door, people wanting to fight you. We've got into arguments, like actual fights almost, and also people just being horrendous, like honestly, like following my parents into stores. And this is Central Jersey, which is very brown. This happened to everyone who's South Asian or Arab looking. Because again, you have Arabs like Lebanese, which is the whole point of race being so stupid because they look quote unquote white. But you have other Arabs who are Iraqi American or such who look browner. They get trapped in this stupid vortex. But this is worse. I feel worse. The things that are being said openly, not just online by wackos, but by, I think, Randy Ogles from Tennessee, recently said something horrific about Muslims. Andy Fine, he goes on every other week saying something horrific about Muslims, saying if I had a choice between Muslims and dogs, I'd choose dogs. And he was saying he was joking about someone else, but the person who made the original post was actually joking. This guy was literally using it as a way to bring back anti-Irish sort of standard of like hatred. And I've told my students, this is like you said earlier with George W. Bush. George W. Bush deserves to be under the Hague for what he's done to the Iraqi people. That's truth. At this moment right now, he still holds the lead in terms of kills with Trump. But in terms of rhetoric and the actual political environment, this is the irony of the timeline we're in, which is also maybe a separate time for another part, like what kind of era we can describe this. Because is this progress? Is this not? Because it's like we have Zoran, progressive in the sense that he's Muslim and he's leading New York City. But then you have a whole like cavalcade of nonsense that I think wouldn't have existed even 10 years ago. Like, I feel like we've regressed. When you have members of Congress openly saying you'd rather choose dogs over Muslims and being applauded and still having a seat in power, while other people who are Muslim Americans who can't even say from the river to the sea are being punished, to me, this is worse than 9/11. So I just wanted to say that. And that's the war on terror. And that also speaks to the liberal and so-called mainstream conservative groundwork that paved the way to this moment. Because as much as George W. Bush and Obama would go on and talk about, moments of saying, there are good Muslims and bad Muslims, they still did the other things that allowed this constituency to grow. One, they feted Fox News, which in every household fed them images of the Iranian masses being crazy. And then to Obama's case, I mean, to be honest, Obama is better in the sense of like he also allowed some better relations with Cuba. He had to deal with Iran. But even Obama, I mean, did he really challenge Zionism? No. He kind of, if you guys remember, Benjamin Netanyahu came to the U.S. while he was, I'm sure hated this, but nonetheless, he came here and spoke to a joint House of Congress with the Senate and Congress. Remember that? And people, like some Democrats didn't go, but a lot of them did go.
Right.
So they set the stage for this madman who is also racist. And now is, his wife, I think, after October 7th said that Hamas is worse than the Nazis. I mean, this is just, I want to say, like, this is a worse moment than that. And then your first question having to do with, I forget, what was the first question? I got off on the whole tangent about, like, how much the
sucks. I guess the first one was just having to do with, like, what you would tell comrades to practically, that we can
yeah. I got a good answer for that. One, don't do anything by yourself. That's one. Like, enough of the posting instead. That works. I post. I have a Substack. Gonna one day advertise that. But listen, you got to do things like Anthony and all of us do, which is you got to be at least in some group, even if it's frustrating. Like, we're not talking about, like, Proud Boys here. We're talking about unions and even liberal groups. Like, not saying you should do this, but if you're part of Indivisible, even somehow, and No Kings rallies come through, at least you're part of something where you can then reach more people. Right? Like, if you're just doing it and expect, like you said, this is the other inverse of Blanc. If you're just expecting your ideas to flow into the ether and somehow, land in someone's water or something, it's not going to work. You're going to have to do this collectively. And that means joining DSA, CPUSA, joining the unions that you might have some. And if you don't, there's definitely progressive groups around. And if that's too difficult, you can still, for the Maduro and Flores' sake, you can still contact your lawmaker. And yes, exactly. And you can, PSL, by the way, I voted PSL, so I want to shout them out. And also, you can also put attention to progressive lawmakers not in your state. Why not? Why not call them up and say, hey, I'm a progressive voter in Nevada, or not Nevada, but I'm in Tennessee, God forbid. But I'm calling you in New York, Mr. Mondani. And you did say you had a phone call with Trump saying you were displeased with Maduro being captured. I'm sorry, that's not enough. Can you please let him know that in the future elections, I might not want to donate to him again? You can do that. That's still up to you. And he does deserve to respond to you. Because you know what? Zoran, as much as I have some sympathy as a Desi American and he's pretty cool, guess what? Him just saying he's a little displeased with Maduro is not enough. This is, like Anthony, I have said, this is another red line. If Maduro and Flores are allowed to wither away in prison, this just makes the fascists stronger. And so you can also do that. You can just reach out to progressive lawmakers and make them squirm a bit in terms of, like, what they actually say and what they actually do.
Beautiful. You're on fire and it's your birthday.
Yeah, I mean, I was really excited for this, and also I'm really pissed off. So it's perfect convergence.
Yeah, no, it's really good. It's really good. I mean, we're about to do a study group in a moment, so I got to bounce in a moment and I got to make the family dinner. But Tony, we didn't talk about where we stand on the left in regards to the F word. Not that one.
You know where I stand on it, so but go ahead.
Well, no, I mean, it's a real conundrum in a way. And, because I myself, the position that I had on it was, well, Trump is this personalist, kind of Bonapartist, very idiosyncratic kind of figure the first time around. And, Bannon had a whole vision to implement, and then Trump didn't do it. And instead, he just kind of allowed for the Mitch McConnell policy to happen. And maybe rhetorically, Trumpism was this kind of gesture towards fascism, but never materially so. Everything now has changed in the second presidency of Donald Trump. After Jan 6, I think things have changed radically since that moment. Frankly, there's a resentment against the established liberal establishment on behalf of Trump, and he is going full Bannon in certain ways, but he's also going beyond that into, as we said, this kind of new UFC neocon horizon of imperial belligerence and chaos. So talk to us about where you stand on and what you would advise for socialists to say in regards to how we define fascism in relationship to the Trump moment right now.
Well, luckily, we don't have to define it because Trump's already doing it for us. And it's our job to get on board with the analysis that people like Dr. Horn and myself have been putting forward for several years now, which is that what we're seeing is a resurgence of American fascism, not a unique iteration thereof that has cropped up out of nowhere, but one that is intimately entangled with the history of settler colonialism and enslavement and massacring of the indigenous and imperialism in the history of the United States from the well, some might say the 16th century, but let's just say the 17th and 18th century, 18th and 19th centuries and into the 20th centuries. And we need to understand and form an analysis on that basis. And I agree with pretty much everything you just said, Daniel, in terms of January 6th and the pardoning of the January 6th protesters and the conscripting of those let's not call them protesters, let's call them insurgents or something, insurrectionists. And the conscripting of those insurrectionists into the ranks of the ICE and border and customs enforcement agents, into the Trump regime's own personal federal army at this point. Those have the hallmarks of fascism that perhaps even make the parallel, which has often been eschewed, of Weimar Germany and the rise of Nazi Germany in the 1930s. It's an analogy that makes a lot of leftists uncomfortable. And I think that there is a critique to be made of the overuse of that analogy. However, I think that there are some features of that analogy that are rather undeniable and could perhaps even be helpful in our present moment. I have nothing personal against people like Daniel Bessner and Ben Burgess, even if they have something personal against me. That's fine. I find much of, especially Bessner's work, I find a lot of agreeable points in his work. But I think that they need to correct the record and go back and re-examine this question and produce some more work addressing it, because I think that there is a lapsing in terms of responsibility when we simply avoid the question by claiming semantic or definitional or liberal uses of the term. And I think it's time that we reassess this particular question.
Beautiful. I think that's perhaps an invitation to a future discussion. I don't want to use this word debate because that's overused, but like a comradely discussion on that question, because I've had Bessner on the show, and I think it's a worthwhile conversation. I was very sympathetic to his position against Jason Stanley, but Jason Stanley is a liberal. He's not a socialist.
Right,
so
right.
Those things actually matter, but again, I don't want to fall into some kind of like academic twaddling where we're sort of just like semantically, doing this kind of thing, because what's happening right now is truly, I'm from a family that has some Trump voters in it, which I say all the time. And it's why I was very eager to debate the megacoms, So I know how this stuff works. I know how it works, and I'm opposed to it. But what I'm seeing now, nothing could prepare me for it. Nothing could really prepare me for it. And I think that people that underplay it do a disservice to the reality, like I showed with the screenshot of Hegseth and Wounded Knee. I mean, this is so monstrous. Iran, Maduro, Cuba. Anybody that wants to say, oh, yeah, it's Trump being cute, or, oh, yeah, it's this kind of, WWF thing. That's like the banality of it. You're allowing the kind of comedic banality of Trump to sort of overshadow the horror of what's actually going on here.
Also, just to say about that, the State of the Union again, and also other times, and I've showed my students, what I do is I take quotes from some good people, but some bad people, and I have them up there and I have them explain what stands out to them from these quotes. And one thing I've had them notice, and I noticed in the process in a way, was of course this emphasis on Somalis, Somali Americans, right? Which is both. I mean, it's not comedy at all, but it's just like, the way that some people protect themselves against the fascism use of it. It's like, oh, well, it's just speech, right? But it's not. With Somali Americans, it's another example of that, right? Trump in the State of the Union said, I think at one point he never said Somalis as Somali Americans. He just said Somali pirates at one time, I think, in the State of the Union, right? And they used terms like Stephen Miller Stephen Miller is inspired by Camp of the Saints. Now, the difference is, in the previous time that Trump was in power, he couldn't get everything he wanted except for family separation. Now it's done. Like, not done for us, but just like he's got more and more, you know. But Camp of the Saints, if everyone knows, it is what was missing was the end result, but now the end result is slowly happening. But the inspiration was always there. And in terms of the Somali American community, how they've been attacked is beyond comedy. It's just like, it is real. It's a rhetoric matching policy. ICE is attacking them on purpose. There's been so many videos in Minneapolis prior to ICE maybe folding a bit, where they were going after just literally communities of Hmong Americans. Like, they were just finding brown people of a certain type, going to their neighborhoods, knocking on doors, and hoping they'd come outside so they can quickly grab them. That is fascism. And also, the thing about the debate, so with Anthony and Dr. Gerald Horne are the ones who talked about this a lot. But with Daniel Bessner, I just want to reiterate, I do find him, in my view, more sincere, because he actually did interview with me for an article I was writing about the American Empire. So I just want to say, Daniel himself, even if we disagree, I do find him more sincere and honestly much more academic and learned and intelligent. I'm going to be really blunt. I think Dr. Burgess is a bit different sometimes. And I think sometimes he is unwilling to admit what he also really wants to think and say. Because if I remember, he's also said some other things about land back and things like that don't make a lot of sense either. So I'm just trying to separate the two, even though I actually think that Daniel Bessner is somebody who has like real books in my eyes, not to what your guys are saying, that is very, very important to me. Burgess, and then there's a certain type that kind of, I don't know if they want to even have a discussion. And sometimes it comes from a place just like with Blanc, where it's a little bit, you question the pool of knowledge it's coming from. If that makes it, because you're just confused. Because yes, there's no communist threat inside of America. That's true. That's a big function of fascism, which is anti-communism. But the language is still, but the attacks on the DSA, the presumptive attacks on people who are seen as a threat to law and order, Palestinians, in some ways, that could be not a complete one-to-one, but that's happening, right? And that happened is, I want to raise the work of Sharice Burden-Stelly, Red Scare, Black Scare. The attack on Black nationalists who are not communists were still part of the anti-communist array of fascism inside America. I just want to put that there. I didn't mean to cut you off.
The African People's Socialist Party in
yes,
under the Biden
exactly.
Biden administration. That was a clear anti-communist, anti-fascist, legalistic attack on Omali Yeshitali. Now, look, in the spirit of self-criticism, because I see this sort of gesture of Daniel reappraising his position on Bonapartism and Trump and so forth, I may have contributed to a sort of ultra-leftist culture of brinkmanship and bad faith sort of personal attacks with some of these individuals online, and that was not the good thing to do. And I actually will be sincere and apologize for doing so, because I agree with this Blanc character on this point especially. We need to recalibrate the left and come together against this threat more than ever before.
Yes, that's true.
And I want to extend that to any and all willing constituents of that form of politics. And then one other final point with two ironies. And I know you have to go, Daniel. I think that we probably do too. The rhetoric of the Somali pirates and the rhetoric about, for instance, Haitian immigrants and Haitian Americans eating animal meat and so forth.
Pets. Well, they said pets to make that to reinforce that depravity of the act, which never happened.
Meanwhile, the United States is seizing oil vessels in the Atlantic Ocean and in the Caribbean Basin, some of which are Russian flagged.
Right.
Meanwhile, RFK is going out and eating all manner of bushmeat and promoting the same publicly. Ask yourself, if you're listening to this and you subscribe to this sort of politics, who the real barbarians are and who the real savages are when they spew this sort of rhetoric. Because, and this connects many of these threads together, you've often heard a slogan: every admission, every accusation is a crime, or every accusation is a confession. Excuse me. Mm-hmm. I butchered the slogan. I'm obviously no good at political slogans. Thus, my disdain for for giving them an outsized role in politics. But that accusation idea, that's happening here. That's something we typically ascribe to the state of Israel when it is trying to foment and lubricate the path for these incursions into West Bank and in Gaza and so forth. That's happening here. That's the same sort of rhetoric. That's the international dimension of this right-wing fascist movement and its imperial endeavors sort of packaged into one right here on the U.S. mainland and its surrounding areas. You know, these drone strikes in the Caribbean that have killed Trinidadian women. How many? Go look it up if you're listening. How many drone strikes by private U.S. military firms have killed Haitians?
Right.
Not but 90 kilometers or whatever off the coast of the United States. Go look it up.
Right.
These politics are here in the Western Hemisphere, close to home. Understand that. And that's why we wrote this piece. Right. The seizure and the incursion into the sovereign nation of Venezuela in the attempt to seize the nationalized oil infrastructure, and this serves multiple ends, but that's just one of the ends.
Thank you.
That's happening. That puts forward a praxis and a politics that is not at all far away from where you are currently sitting if you're in the United States.
And Anthony, I just want to say also to the point of depravity, the Epstein report, our elites are part of the Epstein report, so it's not like you can go look at all those files and see yourself. You're exactly right. Yeah.
Well, comrades, lots to digest, lots to think about, lots to explore in the future. I just want to say how grateful I am to both of you for joining us today and for these insights. It really was good, and we must, in fact, do it again. Please support my work on Patreon. You can become a member of Patreon, get early access to all my stuff. Sudip, if you follow him on Twitter, I will retweet you. So you go to my Twitter, you'll see his handle. What's your handle, Sudip?
Resist Run.
Yeah. Resist Run. Yeah, you'll see it's already there on my Twitter. And so is Anthony's as well. So listen, guys, thank you so much for all of this. I wish everyone the best, and more soon.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Peace out, everybody.